right. Great. So as Jenny said, I'm just going to review very briefly the Gene Curation SOP version 8 updates. These were published last fall, but this is really timely as the GCI is going to be implementing these changes. So we just want to make you all aware because this release is slated for the end of July here, and it will affect potentially some of the curations. As you know, we've been announcing that over and over on the Biocurator work group. So hopefully you all know. And for those of you who have gotten the email we send out through Biocurator work group, if you are interested in beta testing this new updates, please contact Stanford. They'll be able to send you a link. You can add a new login and be able to test this out and provide some feedback to them ahead of the call. So as you all may remember, the main update is a revamp to the genetic evidence scoring system. This basically wasn't necessarily a huge change to the scoring overall, but it was just in the logic that we use. Before, if you had an other variant type that was not predicted or proven or null, it did say you needed some evidence for gene impact to get that 0.5. So if you didn't have it, it was a downgrade. And so we did want to address that issue of always having to downgrade a missense variant without functional data. And when it was unclear, that there was no distinction between types of de novo variants as well, and that distinct values for loss of function in de novo variants and autosomal dominant inheritance, but not in the recessive. So again, there were some caps that were put on here based on this that we wanted to change because it was maybe downgrading some evidence, especially when you think of the gain of function relationship. And so we didn't want to penalize those types of gene disease relationships. And so here we had you saw the previous scoring that was deviated between autosomal dominant X-linked and autosomal recessive. And again, it had de novo as its own category, which may be kind of confusing. And also here picking that de novo category. So what you'll find is that it was summed up into each variant is now scored rather on just a case level that is dependent on whether it is a predicted or proven null or an other type of variant. You can now distinguish which type of that variant was de novo based on the information you have. Obviously go into the SOP to begin to understand whether you can apply these de novo points. It does need to be something that is confirmed, which means parents are tested and found to be negative. And we also have other update, but you also are able to add functional data. So we baseline those points assigned to 0.1. So there's no longer necessarily a reason to downgrade. It is upgrading. And then you can apply more upgrades based on those de novo categories. And we did remove those maximums as we indicated. There is no change to the segregation evidence that stayed the same as well as the case control. So this was on case level data alone. We do want to remind you all to please always check with your GCEP to determine that final variant scoring. What we are giving you in this score is a default or a suggested scoring. Each individual will be able to adjust that score per your variant in the case, but we do want to remind you to check with that final variant scoring and that this framework really is serving for a guide based on our SOP. So again, baseline numbers would be 1.5. All of our variant types are 0.1 points. And you add additional points to that baseline score for any upgrades, including that functional and de novo, as well as upgrades and downgrades may be appropriate at the discretion of your GCEP. And you will have that ability, and Matt will be able to show you how that happens in the GCI. And then for autosomal recessive diseases, you assess each variant independently, and the GCI will be able to do that now. Then you will sum the final score. We do suggest you round up to the nearest half point. There is one exception that for 2 missense variants without functional data, that would be 0.2 points, but it's rounded to 0.25 based on the scoring that we have currently in the GCI. And no single proband may score more than 3 points. So you can see how if you had a predicted proven null variant with functional data is 2, with de novo, you're at 2.5 for autosomal dominant, but for a recessive, if you have 2 of these, you would now be at almost 5 points. That will be capped at 3. And so those are the main updates that we have for scoring. The SOP does have a table to outline some different examples. We do want to present some caveats just to remind you that these default scores do assume the variant type is consistent with the expected disease mechanism. If this is not the case, downgrade or do not score that evidence unless there is compelling rationale for partial scoring. Again, if your gene disease mechanism is gain of function and you are presented with an individual that has a loss of function or truncating variant, you may want to consider not scoring that case or scoring down. Certainly check with your GSEP and see how they feel about that scoring. You also want to document that rationale for why you chose to score or not score in the GCI. That will be in a box called explanation. So again, as we went through the example, and then variance may be up or downgraded beyond the values that we're suggesting here, but again, within the final scoring range. This is based on the strength of the evidence. So again, for example, a missense variant may score at the top of its range if its robust functional assays demonstrate the missense is acting in a manner consistent with the expected disease mechanism. So you can move those points up higher, but again, within our specific range, and you will be capped with that range in the GCI. Also, those variants being up and downgraded for other reasons beyond those listed in the chart and are at the discretion of each GSEP. So you do want to document the rationale for up or downgrading variants in the GCI. You may, for example, opt to upgrade missense variants if they are within a known functional domain and they appear to be clustering in the same area of the gene. You can also consider upgrading based on consistency or specificity of the phenotype, the likelihood that a putative null variant actually leads to loss of function, and so on. So when you do assign those points for de novo status, consider further upgrades if statistical evidence shows that de novo variation in a particular gene is rare, but use caution and consider not upgrading or not scoring if a gene is known to have a high rate of de novo variation, for instance, with Titan. So these are other considerations we would just like you to make on the scoring for these SOP updates. And that is all I have, and I will kick this over to Matt Wright and the Stanford team.
Thanks, Courtney. Great. Just quickly, does anyone have any questions for Courtney before we move ahead? Okay, and feel free to put any questions in the chat too, and we'll probably have some time at the end as well to discuss any questions. Whenever you're ready, Matt, thanks so much.
Oh, sorry, I was on, typical, I was on mute anyway. So hello everyone, thank you Courtney for that excellent refresher on all those changes that happened when the SOP for gene curation switched over from version 7 to version 8. I'll now go over upcoming updates to the Gene Curation Interface, the GCI, and that's to let you know exactly what's changing in order to support the SOP version 8 changes that Courtney just identified just now. I apologize in advance that some bits of this are going to be a repetition of the things that Courtney just told you, but they'll be with a slant toward implementation in the GCI. That flips to the next, oh yeah, it's gone to the next slide now. So the first thing to note is that the changeover to supporting SOP version 8 will happen at the end of this month, on July 30th. Second thing to note is that only your scores for individuals will be affected by the change. All other scores, such as family, case controlled, and experimental, that'll be completely unaffected and they'll remain unchanged. But once the switch over to V8 happens at the end of this month, then from that point on, no new individuals will be able to be scored, and instead variance scoring will be introduced. So under the new SOP V8 framework, whenever you add a variant to a proband, then in order to score it, you're always required to answer the same set of questions as specified in the SOP. First, what type of variant is it? Is it predicted or proven null, or is it other variant type? Next is the variant de novo. If the answer is yes to this question, then you also have to confirm whether maternity and paternity are confirmed. And finally, you have to identify whether or not there is functional data to support the variant. This is a yes/no selection, but if you answer yes, then you also have to describe the functional data. As I said, these questions will be required in order to score each variant. Here is how probands are currently scored in the SOP V7 framework. And the first example we're looking at here, and actually the following slides are for autosomal dominant X-linked and mitochondrial modes of inheritance. all of which use the same scoring schema in the GCI. So in SOP v7, after you've added in information about an individual, then at the bottom of the individual evidence form, the GCI currently allows you to add like a variant associated with that specific proband. Here you see on the upper left an example of that. You're asked if there are two variants, are they in trans, and is it de novo or not? And as you can see, there is no asterisk next to some of these questions. And that's because in the SOP v7 framework, these are not required. And so actually often these questions are not currently answered at all. The bottom right panel you see here, this shows what happens when you currently go to score the proband. You confirm the case type, you get a default score, and you can override the default score with your own score if you want to, as long as you provide a rationale. Now, when the SOP v8 framework goes live, this is going to change. Now, when you've completed your individual evidence form and you go to add a variant to that individual, below each variant you add, you'll now be presented with those new required questions I mentioned a moment ago, which are, just repeat, what is the variant type? Is it de novo? And if so, is it paternity confirmed? And is there functional data to support the variant? You will then answer these required questions just for that one variant that you've just added. If you choose to score the variant, then based on your answers to those required questions for that one variant, the GCI will automatically fill in a default score for that variant. Again, if you choose to, you can override the default score, but if you do, you're required to provide a reason. So the calculations for the default scores can be found in the SOP, but here they all are listed in one table. So as you can see on the top row that I've indicated here, if a variant is other variant type and has no functional data and it is not de novo, then the default is 0.1 points. And for that variant, if you choose to change the score, you can only do so up to the maximum of 1.5 points. So the GCI will impose that as the upper limit. And at the other end of the scale, on the bottom of this table, for a variant that's predicted or proven null and does have functional data, and it is de novo, then the default score is 2.5 points. And the max you can increase that to is 3 points. But you don't have to calculate these. The default points will be generated, obviously, for you automatically within the GCI. Upon scoring and saving your variant, beneath where you scored your variant, you'll now see a table that summarizes how you've scored your variant. It shows you how you answered those required questions for the variant, based on your answers, what the default score was. If you adjusted the score, it will show that, and of course, your explanation. Now I'm going to show you what happens if the mode of inheritance is autosomal recessive. And as you can see, after you add in a variant, it's those same required questions again that you answer based just on that one variant. And again, you get a default score based on your answers to those questions. But again, you can choose to change it if you provide a reason, but only up to the max score allowed for that type of variant. And again, the default scores and maximum scores for autosomal recessive variants can be found in the SOP. But here's a table of all the AR default scores. Now, these are the default scores for each individual variant, but what if you want to add a second variant? Well, when you have two variants, the default scores are applied to both, and then they're added together to provide a combined total default score for the two variants. This is a general rule, but there are two caveats. First, when you combine two variants, the combined total default score should max out at 3. The second is that if you have two variants that are other type with no functional data and they're not de novo, as shown on the top row here, then instead of doubling the 0.1 to get a 0.2 default score, instead the combined score is 0.25. And thankfully, again, the GCI auto magically fills in those default scores for you. When you've added in and scored two variants, then that variant scoring summary table at the bottom will show each of the two variants on separate rows. It will show the variant type, the de novo status, and default scores for each variant. However, the table will then combine the default scores into the default total score, and it will then show if you've adjusted either of the variant scores and what your combined adjusted score is for the two variants combined. So in this example, the upper variant had a default of 0.5, the lower variant a default of 2, so their combined default will be 2.5. However, the upper variant has been adjusted to 0.25, so instead the adjusted total score is like 2.25. So the table actually does your calculations for you, you just do the adjustments to the individual variant scores. If the two variants you're entering are homozygous, and so are the same variant twice, then when you go to enter your first variant, you'll need to check the homozygous checkbox shown here at the top. Doing this tells the GCI to only expect one variant to be added. So you only need to answer those required questions and score just that one variant. And then that variant you added once is then added twice to the summary table at the bottom. The same variant is shown on both rows of the table. And just like any other two variants, the two default scores and adjusted scores are combined together to provide the final scores. The final mode of inheritance for scoring within the GCI is semi-dominant. For semi-dominant gene disease records, when you add in an individual, you must take the extra step of selecting the proband type from these four options and the pull down indicated at the top. Based on your selection, when you add variants, they will then be scored within the GCI via the autosomal dominant X-linked mitochondrial scoring mechanism or the autosomal recessive scoring mechanism. So the proband type pull down selection is the only real extra step for semi-dominant, because once you've made your selection, after that, you're guided down one route or the other. Now, once you've scored your variants, they will appear in the classification matrix. And of course, we've had to make some updates to accommodate the new variance scoring in the SOP V8 framework. So here you can see in the current genetic evidence section of the SOP V7 table, shown at the top, we have the counts and points based on proband scoring. In the new SOP V8 classification matrix shown at the bottom, the genetic evidence section has variant counts and points instead. So as you can see, for each variant type within each MOI, the matrix scores the variant counts, the number of probands, the total points, and then finally the points counted, which maxes out at a maximum of 12 points. And of course, the evidence summary has also been changed to accommodate the new variant scoring. So within each evidence summary, you'll now find a new table called the case level variance table. And in this table, you see each proband in the first column, but then the data is split per variant into rows. So you can scan across the proband and see the pertinent information you curated about that proband. But additionally, you can also see which variants were scored for that proband. Variant information is split into rows so that you can see how these individual variants were scored and how they were collated to provide the final points. Within the GCI, when you save a classification as provisional or approved, that classification is permanently saved as a snapshot. And within this snapshot, you have the matrix at the top and the full evidence summary at the bottom. And you can always see these saved snapshots by clicking on the provisional summary or the approved summary link in your saved classifications. Now, since these snapshots are recorded like a permanent record of the summary at the time they were saved, then any you saved under the SOP V7 framework will still appear in the SOP V7 format when you go back and look at them. Snapshots will only appear in the new SOP V8 format if they were saved after the switchover to SOP V8 at the end of this month. So you'll always have a historical record of your old saved V7 classifications that you can go back and look at. Now, so far I've shown you what to do when you go to score new variants in the GCI, but what about after July the 30th if you're returning to recurate a record that you previously curated under the SOP V7 framework? Well, one thing you'll notice is that because the GCI no longer supports scoring probands, then when you go to view the classification matrix, then any proband scores you previously created will no longer be shown because they're no longer supported in the new system. What you'll need to do for each of these probands is go to each of the probands that you previously scored to now score the variants associated with them instead. So for each proband, you need to select that proband to edit it within the landing page, as shown here. And when you go into that individual, you'll see that all the information you previously entered about that individual is still there. So the disease phenotype data is the same, the demographics data is still there, and the method section is still there. Indeed, the only changes will be when you scroll down to the section at the bottom where you previously scored the proband. As you know, these proband scores are no longer used in the new framework. However, all the previously curated probands that you scored are available for you to use for reference when you're scoring the individual variants instead. You'll find the previously scored proband data just above the section in the form where you add variants and score them. So you can easily copy any information across or within the same panel. Any variants you associated with the proband are still there, so you don't need to actually look them up and add them in again. However, as you know by now in this presentation, you do have to score the individual variants. And so to do that, you have to answer the new required questions for each variant. Now, unfortunately, these data could not be mapped across automatically for a few reasons. Firstly, the GCI only knows what your scores were for the proband as a whole, not for the individual variants associated with the proband, so there's no way the scores could be mapped. Additionally, some of the information to answer these questions is just not known for most variants. For instance, where two variants were lumped together before with one proband, when separated, the GCI doesn't know what type each of the individual variants is. And also the de novo question in SOP was not required, and so it's often missing. And actually the functional data was actually hardly ever filled in the current system, which is part of the reason why we switched to the new one. So the GCI just doesn't know the answer to these required questions for most variants. So I'm afraid it does require you to go in and answer these questions yourself in order to save your variants in the new schema. But as I said, you can copy the information when it's available from the saved retired format you can see at the top. Oh, it's not gone to the next screen. Oh, no, it's gone. So after doing so, you'll then be able to score each variant. Oh, it's working now. And upon saving it, then your save scores for each variant will be collated and displayed at the top of the classification matrix, so you can see the fields will start to be filled in there based on that one I just added. So if you choose to then save that new classification and go on to save it as provisional and then approved, then you can publish it to the ClinGen website. And when it appears on the ClinGen website, they'll automatically know that it's generated using the SOP v8 framework, and they will display it using a new table containing variant scores instead of proband scores. Your old SOP v7 framework classifications that were published to the ClinGen website prior to July the 30th will still be in their old format, and they won't get updated until you republish your record under the new format when you go to recurate them. Another feature request is being released on July 30th, so I'm going to mention that now too, because it's in our beta test site, so you'll see it when you go in there. So this new feature allows you to record the earliest clinical publication. To do so, when you're on the landing page for a record and you select a paper, the abstract and other details which are shown in the center of the panel now also includes a checkbox, which you should check if the paper you're looking at is the earliest report of a variant of the gene causing the disease of interest in a human. After doing that, if you go to the classification matrix, you'll now see under the replication of a time section that the PubMed ID for that record and a year of that paper have been automatically added in. So I should say if you mark more than one paper as the earliest, say they were all in the same issue of a journal, then all of them will appear. So back to SOP version 8, we have a beta site up and running. You can see the URL here. I've also created a tiny URL of SOP v8 to make life easier. Please go to this test site to see how the new functionality will work in the GCI, but also to see how your old proband scores will look when we do the switch over at the end of July. There are a couple of important things to remember about this test site. One, please do not enter real curations into the test site. This is just to test functionality. No data will be permanently saved, and curated data cannot be transferred to production. So please go and have a play around and test out the functionality, but don't add in real curations. Secondly, we need to sign you. Well, each person that goes in will have to sign up again to use the test site by choosing the create account button like you did when you first went to log in. But the test site does know you and your details from production. So if you sign up using the same email address you use when you access production, then it will recognize who you are and you will have the same access to your old data and your affiliations. And this test site contains the same data found in production, I think up until June the 26th. So it won't have any data after that. A big thank you to all the GCI VCI team for all the work they do to keep the VCI GCI up and running and to keep updating these interfaces based on user requests. And a big thank you to the Gene Curation stakeholder proxies from the Gene Curation Working Group, who provide most of the specifications to turn those user requests into actionable items. So now at this point, I'm going to stop for questions, and then if we don't have any questions or active questions, then I can also attempt to do like a quick live demo to show some of those features that I was just talking about within the beta site itself.
That sounds great, Matt. And I did put the link for the beta site in the chat in case anyone just wants to go directly there. So yeah, it seems to be working really nicely. It's great. Does anyone have any questions for Matt?
I should have said, if anybody's got any they go into the beta test site and they've got any suggestions for like minor tweaks and things, if they could let us know preferably by the end of next week, like give us a chance to get that in by the end of the month.
Oh, there's a message I'm getting saying that the tiny URL doesn't work, but the first link does. So yeah, just use the first link.
Oh, that's a shame. I did that yesterday and it worked.
maybe I didn't copy.
That's so unreliable.
Oh, you know what? Okay, let me try something.
So should I go ahead with like the quick demo, and then like if people got any questions, they can ask them at the end?
Yeah, that sounds great, Matt. And I think to get back to the tiny URL, I think what it had done, it had made live the last bracket, the parentheses. So I'll put in the correct one. That was my just when it went into the chat box. So I'll post the correct tiny URL.
Thanks. So my ambitious plan for this live demo just now is just to quickly go into the live beta site. It's just really just to really show you again some of the things that I just covered in my slide presentation, but this time real in the test site, such as scoring, ADXL and mitochondrial scoring, AR and semi-dominant modes of inheritance, and what happens when you recurate an entry. Let me escape this. So I'm actually going to do this as if I'm a member of the hearing loss GSET. So sorry to Marina and all the other hearing loss curators. When you go to the beta test site, you'll get to see some funky curations that have been added in by me. So here we are at the landing page for an autosomal dominant record. And here we see an example person that was added by me. Sorry, it's not scrolling. Oh, there we go. There we go. Example person, obviously not a real person. That was added me yesterday. So if we click to edit this person, see I've added all the information in. So now, as I say, you go down to the bottom and you go to add a variant in associated with that individual. This is a good start. There we go, add that variant in. Okay, and now you see, with this, you've got the information at the top here associated with that variant, and then I can answer those questions we were just talking about, like the variant type. I have to answer, is it de novo? And if it is, then I have to answer, is it maternity, paternity confirmed? Is there functional data? My functional data reasons in here, and then I can go to score it because I've answered those questions. And I can either pick the default score or I can select a different score. As you can see, here's the table I was talking about earlier. So the information I put above here is automatically tabulated into the table. You can see how I answered these questions, what the default score was, the adjusted score, so what the total score is, and my explanation. So if I save this, now when I go to the classification matrix, you can see it's added in that one person here at the top of the matrix. There we go. So I could also actually, that's while I'm here, let me go back and I'll show you the preview evidence scored. So this preview evidence scored shows you for the record that you're in, how the evidence summary would look if you went to save that. So if I go and have a look at this, you should see the new format as well. So you can see here's what I was talking about. Here's the new table in the evidence of the genetic evidence case level variance table. It's added in this like one variant that I put in. So you've got the proband information, and then you've got the total points. So the same thing for this is an autosomal recessive entry, another made up person. So I go to the bottom. And this time I'm going to add in 2 variants to this one. Okay, I should not keep adding that variant. It seems to be taking a while to pull that one back. There we go. Alright, well, you can see I can add the information about that. Let me just do that quickly. Right. And here's the like that at the bottom there, as you saw. And now I'm going to add a second one in. And here's what I was talking about. Oh no, I've got to score it yet, sorry. So here's what I was talking about before. So you can see the 2, obviously this wouldn't happen because you've got different genes, but so here you can see the table at the bottom that summarizes the scoring that you've done for the individual variants at the top. And it showed that I adjusted that second score to what the total score is. Now, the other thing to note actually here is if I go to check, if I want to do the homozygous, or if I go to check this now, actually, it'll give me a warning message. Let me show you that. There, because you have to clear one of the variants because it has to know which one of the 2 variants you want to keep if you put 2 in to say which one is homozygous. So if I go down, I have to clear one of these. I'll just clear this one. I check the box to say that variant is homozygous. You can see that it's automatically added that variant in twice. I didn't have to add that in again or anything. And again, if I save this, go view the classification summary, see that in the AR section, it's added that data in that I've just added in. Again, if I go to preview the evidence summary, I wanted to show you this because you can see, oh yeah, I did someone else earlier on this. You can see the information that's been added in. Now, as for semi-dominant, they didn't actually have a semi-dominant record in hearing loss, so I just created this one. Again, example person 3. This is just to show you that mechanism that I was telling you about, that with semi-dominant, you have the extra step above where you add the variance in, where you select the proband type. And then depending on which one of these you select, go to present that one. It then changes so that it's either going to go down the ADXL mito scoring route mechanism, or the AD scoring mechanism ready, or the autosomal recessive scoring mechanism, depending on your selection. So here I just want to show you where you go to do like a recuration. This is an X-linked record, but if you go to the recuration, you'll see that the scores here are missing for this record, the top here, but I've got open somewhere else. I think it's here. Here's the one currently in production. So here's the scores. So these are the ones you obviously want to go back and add these back in, these scores. So I'll just edit any of these. I'll just pick this first one just to show you as an example. So this is what I was talking about before. So this is one of the ones that was scored before, like with a score of 1.5. You can see we copied it. Actually, this didn't have that much information in it because they hadn't answered some of these questions. But this, as you can see, you've got the information here that was previously scored, like for reference. But you'll need to go in and score each the variance. And you see the variance already there. You just need to answer the questions. So just answer this. So now if I go to the classification matrix, you can see that's been added in. So what I would do now, obviously, is once I'd gone back and added all of these in, then I would go on just as usual and save it and then do the approved summary, well, provisional, then approved summary, and then publish that. I'm doing the recuration. So another thing to note here, like I put this example up for Myrinos because this is one where they have a provisional record in there that's not yet approved, but the provisional record was done under SOP v7. So what you can do in this example, because we have that snapshot that was in SOP 7, you don't need to go back. If you're happy with what's in the provisional, you don't need to change anything. You can just click on approve. And because that's in the old SOP 7 format, you can just go ahead and progress that to approve and publish it. And likewise, actually, for this one, which is an approved entry that has not yet been published because it was unpublished, but imagine this is, you want to republish this, you could actually publish this approved record. And it would just go under the current SOP v7 format. Because as I said earlier, to get it under the SOP v8 format, you'd have to go back and save a new classification under the new matrix. So that's my quick run through on the beta site, which is basically just a replication of what I showed you on the slides. What I'll do is I'd encourage you all to go to the beta test site between now and the end of this month so that you can familiarize yourself with what you'll need to do and to see how the GCI will look once the new SOP change has gone ahead. A call out, I have to say to our early beta testers, thank you all for testing you've done so far. But now that the new beta site is released, could you please switch over to this new beta test site for further testing, because this is the site that will get updated when we do any updates with any of your suggested changes. If any of you do spot any issues with the beta site, if you have any suggestions, I'm not in presentation mode, hold on, there you go. Yeah, so if you've got any suggestions or improvements or anything like that, then please do contact us at the help desk at gci@clinicalgenome.org. And of course, if you've got any questions about the SOP or gene curation, then you can contact the Gene Curation Working Group at genecuration@clinicalgenome.org. And again, thanks everyone for your patience in this process of switching over. Please keep an eye out for any emails from our GCI team and or the Gene Curation Working Group over the next few weeks. And this is just in case we need to provide you with any updates about this process. So,
Great. Thanks so much for going through all of that, Matt. And yeah, as Matt was saying, just strongly encourage everybody to go to the beta site and try it out. It's working really well, but just good to familiarize yourselves with everything before the changes go live. Or as Matt said, any little tweaks, feel free